Hello everyone, in this video we are going to look at the 3 different types of sparklines that you can create using Microsoft Excel. So to begin, I'm going to select the data for my sparkline. When you select data for a sparkline, don't select any of the headers, just select the actual data itself. Then go to the Insert menu and skip over the whole section of charts and find the section for sparklines. These are the 3 sparklines that Excel offers: the line, a column, and a win-loss. I will click on line. Data range that I selected appears here, and then it's asking me where do I want the sparkline to be placed. So I can either click on this arrow or just make sure I have a cursor blinking in this cell, and then click the cell where I want the sparkline to appear, and click OK. A small line graph, which is our sparkline, now appears in the cell. You'll notice that if I'm clicked in a cell somewhere, there's no background or anything, but if you click in a cell that contains a sparkline, then it will have a light shaded background. And a sparkline itself kind of acts like a background within the cell. And so if I add, for example, text, this is store A, the text appears in front of the line. Because I am clicked in a cell that contains a sparkline, I now have a sparkline menu at the top. I click on it, I can see the different ways that there are to format a sparkline. You can change the color of the line itself. Also under sparkline color is where you can change the weight of the line to make it thicker. You can also add a marker for each data point. There are different kinds of markers that you can add, and in this section is where you specify the color that you want for each marker, and then in this section is where you specify which type of markers you want to show. So let's go to markers and choose a color. Then the markers option will be checked in this section, and markers appear on the sparkline. If I uncheck it here, then they'll go away. If I check negative points, then the negative point, which is our minus 15,000 marker for that data point, will appear. And I can change the color for the negative point here. I can also show markers for just the first and last data points, or maybe just the high and low data points. The whole idea behind sparklines is that they do not have axis labels or data labels. They are just a very small snapshot of the trend of your data. And as you expand the cell height, you'll notice that the low, by default, is always at the very bottom of the cell, and the high point is always at the very top. However, that can be adjusted, which we'll see. Let's now add sparklines for all the rows in our table. I'll hover the mouse over the bottom right-hand corner of the cell, and then drag down. If I click away from these sparklines and then just click on one of them, notice that all of the lines have a light background. That's because they are all automatically placed into a group. And this means that any formatting changes that we make will be made to the entire group, and I can change the color of the lines all at once. By default, each sparkline in a group is drawn on a separate scale. The vertical axis of each line extends from the minimum value from that row to the maximum value from that row. There are some adjustments that you can make to both the horizontal and vertical axis. Going to the axis drop-down box, you'll see at the top that we are using a general axis type, and there's also a date axis type, but we'll leave it as general for now. There's also an option to show the horizontal axis. The horizontal axis is always 0 in a sparkline, and because each line is plotted on its own vertical axis, it will only show up if we have 0 or less somewhere in our data. So here we have minus 15,000, and so the horizontal axis line is showing up. Here we have 0, it's showing up exactly at 0. The minimum value on this row, 72,000, by default is also where the vertical axis begins for this particular sparkline. And so a horizontal axis of 0, of course, falls below that and will not appear. Hopefully this makes sense. I actually find Sparklines really fun and easy to work with once I get the hang of it. So other changes that you can make to the axis, I'll select the group, go to Sparklines in the axis drop-down box, is you can change the data to be plotted in the opposite direction. And under the vertical axis, there are two different options for setting the minimum and for setting the maximum. So right now, as we've talked about, the minimum is automatic for each sparkline separately, and so is the maximum. If I set the minimum to use the same for all sparklines, then it will choose the minimum out of all of our data, which is minus 15,000, and use that as the minimum for each sparkline. Now that the minimum is set to minus 15,000, the horizontal axis line, which is 0, does show up for each chart. Let's also set the maximum value to be the same for all sparklines to see what happens. The maximum value out of all our data comes from the total row, 431,000. This is now the vertical axis maximum for each line, and it makes it difficult to see the trend for each individual store. I don't want this, so I'm going to select just the total cell. All of them will be highlighted because they're all in the group, so it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm selecting only the total cell, and then I'm going to go to Sparkline and click on ungroup. And now only the total is highlighted, and if I click on one of the other cells, you can see that these are all in a separate group. Because they are in a separate group, even though they are sharing the same minimum and maximum axis, they're a lot easier to read because they're sharing it within this set of data. Then the total sparkline is using this set of data to determine the vertical axis. It can be helpful for a group of sparklines to use the same scale. For example, here we can see which stores have higher profits by looking at the line height. In general, I would say that sparklines are usually set up to use their own axis, automatic for each sparkline, because that's kind of the whole point of them, to be able to see your trends really clearly. A couple things to note is if you have one data point that is completely blank, let's say that store C was actually closed in the year 2021, then you will have a break in this sparkline where there is no data. There are a couple options of how you want to show this. So under the Sparkline menu, if you go to the very left-hand button, Edit Data, from the drop-down, click on Hidden and Empty Cells. And then you can either show the data point that is blank as a 0, or you can connect the two data points on either side of it with a line. You may sometimes want to hide the columns that contain the data. When I do this, the sparklines have disappeared, but when I click in one of the cells, you can see that it's highlighted, so they're still there. You can go back to Edit Data, Hidden and Empty Cells, and check the box next to Show Data in Hidden Rows and Columns. If you have a sparkline that you want to delete, if you just press the delete key, nothing will happen. Under the sparkline ribbon, there is a drop-down box where you can clear the selected sparkline. And if you want to sort your data, you can sort the sparklines right along with it. So I'm going to sort data by the year 2023. Let's now create the second type of sparkline, which is the column chart. And to do this, I'm going to, instead of selecting just one row of data, select all the rows of data and go to Insert, Sparklines, and click on Column Sparkline. Choose where I want the sparkline to be placed and click OK. This says the reference for the location or data is not valid. That's because I only clicked in one cell. I need to click in the same range of cells that match up with my data. With the column Sparkline, we can change the color of the bars, highlight any negative points, and show the horizontal axis, which will be at 0. You will basically have all of the same formatting options, whether you are creating a line or a column Sparkline. Now let's look at the third type of Sparkline that Excel offers. Let's select the data, navigate to the Insert menu, and this time click on the Sparkline win-loss. In this type of chart, any value that is greater than 0 is plotted as a positive bar, and any value less than 0 is plotted as a negative bar, but you'll notice that all the bars are the same size, and any 0 values are displayed as a blank. A win-loss chart is often used to report statistics for athletic teams, as you can imagine. They are usually shown very narrow in order to be able to report a lot of data points in one row. There's one last thing I want to cover. Let's look at the profit for Store A in the year 2023, broken down by month. This store is closed for the season every summer, so we have profits for January through May, then no data rows for June, July, and August, and then profits again for September through December. So if you do have data that is based on dates and there are gaps in it, you can specify how you want the Sparkline to handle it. In order for this to work properly, our data has to be in a date format. If we look in the formula bar, we can see the cell is the date 1/1/2023 and is formatted to display as the abbreviation Jan 2023 in the cell. And for this Sparkline, I'm actually going to click in this cell at the top because you can place a Sparkline wherever you want to. Let's go to the Insert menu and select the column Sparkline. Because we have already specified the location, Excel is now asking us for the data range, which I will highlight. For a column chart, I like the axis to start at 0, so I'm going to change the minimum vertical axis to a custom value 0. The Sparkline has 9 bars for each of the 9 months for which we have data. However, if you want to show that there is a gap in the data for the missing 3 months in summer, then from the Axis drop-down menu, change the horizontal axis from a general type to a date type. And we are prompted for the range of dates that we want to use, so I will highlight January through December. And now the Sparkline has a gap, which is equivalent to the space that would be taken up by the 3 bars in summer. Go back to the original spreadsheet, and this is everything that I wanted to cover. I hope that it was helpful. Like I said, I do enjoy working with Sparklines, and once you get the hang of how the different groups work and how you can group and ungroup Sparklines, adjust the axis, and modify the colors and markers, you can come up with some really cool designs for your data visualizations. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy learning about working with data, please consider subscribing to this channel.